Just taking off from when Anna said that Indians will buy everything and anything online, probably we are the only exception. Alcoholic beverages, it is illegal, very unfortunately, to sell and buy alcoholic beverages online. So I'm going to talk a little bit. Yeah, even to drink them, of course, all sorts of issues that we have to deal with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our insights into our consumers over the last 15 years that Sula has been in existence, and how fast the Indian consumer is changing. So when we started more than 15 years ago, we really had two nations inside this subcontinent of 35 nations, which is, we have 35 states and union territories, and all of them are slightly different from each other. But as far as alcoholic beverages went, there were two nations. There were the whiskey drinkers. I'm sure some of you know that India is the largest consumer of whiskey in the world. Some of you maybe didn't know that. 95% is Indian whiskey, and 5% is Scotch and everything else. So you had the whiskey drinkers, and then you had the non-drinkers. And that was pretty much, as far as we saw it, the way that the country was divided. We have, of course, the largest number of non-drinkers, of teetotalers of any country on earth by far. If you add up all our non-drinkers, it probably adds up to the rest of the world's non-drinkers put together. So, if you talk about, obviously, 50% of the population is below 25, then you have religious taboos against drinking, and then you had an issue which was that women did not drink. So if you take my mother's generation, maybe a few women like my mother would have a glass of shandy once a month, and that would be the only thing that they would drink. And we're talking about until about 20, 25 years ago. But in the last 15 years, there has been a big change in women's attitudes towards having a social drink. And that has been a huge, huge, huge difference for us. So we're talking about young women in the cities, being well paid. They're working in IT, they're in media, they're in the banks, they're in finance, they're in all sorts of F&B. And you did not have this class of young, well-paid, independent working women until just around 15 years ago. And that has made a huge difference. I mean, it's just completely changed things for us, and obviously for a lot of you here in this room, it's going to change consumption patterns. So women basically are now very comfortable. A lot of them, we're talking mainly about the big metros right now, but it's moving fast into the cities which are also around 2 million, 3 million population. They're very comfortable with having a glass or two of wine after work. Social drinking, and especially social drinking after work, is exploding. You just didn't have it even until 10 years ago. There's been an explosion of F&B in India. You have a new restaurant, bar, wine bar, etc. opening. In a city like Mumbai, I pretty much get an invitation for a new opening every week. I mean, it's really crazy. You multiply that across Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, and there's just a total explosion. And all of these people are finding their customers and their clientele. And a large part of that is that women have started to drink. And they are much more comfortable with drinking wine than with whiskey still. That is, obviously there's a few of them who are different, who will drink spirits, but really wine is their go-to drink. And if you look at the role models, they are also changing. So every day you open the papers, you go to the social pages, it's called page 3 in India, as some of you know, and you will see the openings, art galleries, restaurants, whatever, movie premiere party, and everybody is holding a glass of wine. And again, 10 years ago, that did not happen. So that's, again, a big change. So all the Bollywood actresses, the models, the socialites, and just whatever, women in the media, they have a glass of wine and they're totally comfortable with it. I always say that the image of women, you can see, Bollywood reflects it really well. 15 years ago, the only woman who would have a drink would be the fallen woman, the vamp, going up to the guy and, with the bottle of whiskey in her hand, the bad woman. And now that has totally changed. I think it was, I wish. But anyway, it's definitely a much a changed thing. Dil Chahta Hai was the first Bollywood movie in which the hero goes over to his lady's house and presents her with a bottle of wine. And I remember seeing that movie and saying, okay, great. I think that we're really in business. And that has been a big, big, big change. Second is the rise of the health-conscious consumer. And this, again, is a huge change over the last 15 years. If you looked at my parents' generation, yeah, sure, they sort of took care of themselves, but very, very, very sort of. And now you have a totally different India where a lot of young people, especially a lot of the professional employees, are very, very conscious about their health. And you have the rise of all these kind of health tracking things like stepathlon, etc. You have, of course, there's been a big rise in the number in the fitness wearables. And with this, of course, comes more of an interest in wine and less of an interest in spirits. And you're seeing that in a big way, and I think that's going to be a big theme that's going to play out in so many different industries across India, whether you're talking about food, whether you're talking about fitness wear, etc. There is going to be there's already starting to be a big upswing, and there's going to be a huge boom as we go forward. And of course, that has benefited us a lot. Just to give you an idea of Sula, and the kind of growth that we've seen over the last 10 years, we've been growing at about 20 to 25% a year. India is now probably the second fastest growing wine market after China. So clear 15 to 20% growth a year, and we see no reason that that's going to slow down anytime in the next decade or 15 years. So the big challenge that we are facing today is no longer demand. Wine is just going to go like this. The problem is going to be supply. The huge problem is going to be water. And for anyone who is planning on doing business in India, and especially some of the big industrial companies out there, if you go in there without having a very, very clear water and sustainability program, don't even think about it. There's a crisis is upon us, and it's only going to get worse. Of course, we are in the forefront, and we are being hit very hard with declining water tables and the declining monsoon. And I think that's going to have all sorts of implications for all sorts of producers as well as consumers, especially rural consumption in the years coming. Third, we have seen a big change and a big increase in pride in India and pride in Indian products since we started. When we started, wine was very much in that category of products where a lot of our drinkers said, yeah, but I think I'm going to choose an imported wine. I think I'm going to choose an Italian wine, a French wine. That has changed in a big way. For sure, you also have your segment who are much more interested in imported goods, but you have a big segment of people who are very happy and very proud to drink something or consume something with a good Indian story behind it. So we were the first ones when we came out with Sula to say very proudly on the label, produce of India. We named some of our wines after districts in Nasik, where we come from, like our Dindori Reserve, which some of you got to taste last night, our red wine. And that was unheard of before we came on the scene. So, for instance, both the wine companies that existed before us, they used to use French names for their wines. So one of them, their tagline was French Vines, French Traditions. And the other one had names of wines like Riviera, Chantilly, Marquise de Pompadour. This was the biggest producer at that time. They didn't have a single Indian name, and they didn't say India anywhere on the label. And we turned the entire thing on its head. We said we're going to be completely 100% Indian and talk proudly about our story and what makes us unique. And that really struck a chord with a number of consumers. So we come to the whole part of the story. The story is very important. I believe. And it's very important that you go in there with a good story, a compelling story, and an authentic story. And what that means also is, of course, you have to focus on your back end and what creates that story, because you can't go in there, weaving tales that don't actually have a basis in fact. The story doesn't have to necessarily be only for the company. It could be for the country. Please excuse me. When you're the last to speak, normally everyone's like waiting for you to end, so you have to speak like double fast, So the story is so important, and the story could be about the country. So if you talk about Sweden, for example, Sweden has a beautiful story, you know, clean, green, environmentally friendly, all of those things, pristine water, etc. And those are the kinds of stories that, at the end of the day, are going to make a difference to Swedish companies operating in India, I think, especially in the consumer space. Then I'm coming to the end of what I say with a little bit about digital. We cannot sell online, but we can reach out to our consumers online and touch them online in a matter of ways. So we do have a very active online presence, digital marketing, social media. We concentrate very hard on Facebook, on Instagram, and we do see massive growth. Our strategy has been more to go for organic, because I do feel the whole thing about having paid or acquiring your fans through paying, I'm not sure about that whole model. I'm sure some of you have different things, especially when you're selling online. I guess it's a different matter. But when you can't sell online, I think it's better to have a focused community that really, really cares about your product. So we have about 100,000 organically acquired consumers on Facebook, and we are doubling our Instagram users every year with just a few simple tactics, and it's very important for us. We are completely aware of the fact that if you want to reach your consumer, and our consumer for sure is 20 plus and is very, very digitally aware on their mobiles all the time, on their computer all the time. So you have to have a strong focus on digital. So we are very frugal as far as our marketing goes. We hardly spend anything on conventional, above the line advertising, etc. In fact, we have restrictions on that. But what we do is we strategize a lot, and we do focus a lot on social media. So these are just a few of the insights that we have gotten to over the last 16 years. And it's a very exciting time for us. Sula is the largest wine company in India with about 60% market share. But Indians are slowly and surely becoming a nation of wine drinkers. And that says a lot also about the way that they are changing in other ways. And for all of us here in consumer goods or otherwise, this is the most exciting market to be in for the next couple of decades, that's for sure. Thank you very much.